Okay. Good morning, everybody. I am absolutely honoured, delighted, and privileged to be joined by the co-host of the High Performance Podcast, Damian Hughes, coming back for more punishment this time. So thanks very much for coming back for a second time. I'm incredibly grateful. Just been looking through 2,823 reviews of a podcast, all 5-star, which is exceptional.
Right.
Unbelievable guests that you have. So Tim Peake, Gareth Southgate. Do you know what? There's so many. It's just incredible. I was out on Saturday night, and you are my favourite podcast. And
Thanks, man.
wherever I go, I'm a massive advocate of you. And first time after Sam passing away, I went out on Saturday night to friends. And I know they're massive motor racing fans. So I said to them, do you know the podcast? No. So I said, well, you've got to listen to the 2 episodes with Toto Wolff and Christian Horner because they're absolutely exceptional. So really, really, really good.
Thank you, Steve.
No, you're welcome. I thoroughly enjoy the podcast. I think it's exceptional, and I'm incredibly grateful. It's 7:30 in the morning. I know you're busy. I know you're interviewing unbelievable people all the time, and it's crazy the amount of people that are on here at 7:30 watching you. So please, everybody watching it, like it, share it. As I said, that Damian, I don't know if a lot of you are aware, but Damian's brother works or looks after, I think, 10 schools that are disadvantaged. And Damian put me in touch with his brother earlier in the year, and I think donated 12 tablets to the school. Which I know Chris appreciated. And what would be fantastic if you would all be kind enough to make some voluntary donation, as Damian's given up his time, so we can help more school children and make a difference.
Stephen, can I just jump in on that? I wanted just to say thank you for the difference that you made to Chris, and some of the children that he works with have been sort of sexually, emotionally abused. So these are kids really that have had the worst possible start in life, and the difference that the tablets that you donated to his schools, it was just incredible. It just sort of gives these kids like the sense that there are people out there that care for them. These are people that have been burned in the worst possible way about how the adult world treats them. And I think the message that Chris was able to give, that you've done, and that people have been kind enough to support you and donate it, starts to change the narrative for these kids and convince them that the world isn't full of people looking to do them down. It's looking for people to help them up. So thank you massively. And I wanted to let you know from the sharp end of it, the genuine difference that what you're doing in Sam's memory, the difference it makes and the legacy it leaves, the ripple effects it creates is huge.
Thank you. That's very kind. And I want to thank everybody who has donated and has made a massive difference. I know 661 tablets and laptops have gone out to schools nationwide, and I know the difference it's making, but I also know people still need, the schools are in desperate need of them. So great. So my first question to you is, now on session 5, what does you've interviewed some amazing guests. So what does high performance now mean to you, having interviewed all these guests?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question, because I think it's a question that's changed over the series. So I think when I first started, I think like you have this narrative about high performance is about winning trophies, medals on the board, money in the bank, that sort of thing, and doing it sustainably. And it's changed massively over the period of time from that, because we interviewed a lady on Monday called Chrissy Wellington. She's an amazing lady. Her story is incredible, that she was a civil servant up until the age of 24, where quite by accident she discovered that she had this amazing talent, within 4 years, she'd become the world Ironman, female Ironman champion, and then won it for 4 years on the trot. And she talks about this was almost like a latent hidden talent that she'd have never discovered unless she'd have been open to trying new things. But she made a really good point. She said, when you go to a classroom full of like 600 kids and you're telling them that winning is the only thing that matters, there's going to be 599 kids there that walk away assuming that they're a loser. And the reality is, well, that can't be the case, because what have you learned along the way? Have you done the best that you can? And I think my definition of high performance now is do the best you can with the knowledge you have in the moment you're in. And I think what that means is that, sure, there's always room you could do. You could look back on it with perfect hindsight and go, I could have done better there. Well, of course you could. But in the moment you were in and the knowledge you had, you did the best you could. And I think that's quite a liberating definition of high performance, because it means that you don't have to be born with natural gifts. You don't have to measure your success with a bank balance or trophy cabinet. It's simply around knowing that you gave everything you could with the resources you had in that certain moment. So Johnny Wilkinson spoke about all of me. Stephen Gerrard spoke about I go all in. Matthew McConaughey said that life is a verb. It's for doing. And I think my definition of it tries to capture so many of those other lessons that we've been taught.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I mean, for me, there's so many things that have come out, but a lot is about consistency, discipline, and resilience.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are watching this at various degrees. Some are just starting out in their journey in the property industry. Some are more experienced.
Yeah.
Some really struggle getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What advice can you give them from having spoken to the top performers and all the studies that you do with top performing teams? How can people take that first step to get going?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question that I think we've explored it quite a lot, because I think you're right that I think action leads to energy creates action. So it's almost like you just have to get going to get the energy to create some momentum. The way I sometimes explain this, Stephen, is that I think there's 3 stages that require us to be humble enough to then accept that where we are can shift. So this is often referred to as the Dunning-Kruger law, and it's named after 2 guys called Justin Dunning and David Kruger, where these 2 guys read a story about a bloke who had robbed a bank, and he robbed 3 banks. And when he was arrested shortly afterwards, it was an easy arrest for the police because they had CCTV images of him in all the banks. And the robber was like stunned. He was like, how did you recognize me, even with the CCTV images? And they were like, why would we not? And he said, well, I rubbed lemon juice all over my face. And they were like, what's that got to do with it? And this guy had thought that he'd read that in invisible ink, it contained lemon juice. So he rubbed lemon juice on his face, thinking that would make him invisible on the cameras. And these 2 guys, these psychologists from Cornell University, read this, and they were like, how can you be so stupid? How could somebody be so stupid? And that's what gave rise to what they call the Dunning-Kruger law, that says, if you're stupid, you're too stupid to understand just how stupid you are. So it's like the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger club is you're too stupid to know that you're in the Dunning-Kruger club. So what that I think leads to is that I think when we understand that, I think you flip it on its head and you go, if you're good, you understand exactly why you're good as well. If you're a high performer, you can understand, why am I a high performer? But you're equally skilled to know when you're not a high performer, so you know where your circle of competence lies. So I'll give you an example. Like when we interviewed Dylan Hartley, the former England rugby captain, on the podcast, he was telling us all about like rugby and how he was a high performer in that world. Now, I knew that he'd recently become a father, so I asked him how he was intending to pass on these lessons to his kids. And he went, and that was a moment where he knew his circle of competence ended. And he went, I don't know, mate. So what do you mean? He said, well, I've never been a dad before. I'm just learning about it. So he didn't take what he knew and assume that that made him an expert parent. He knew that his circle of competence ended. And I think that captures really beautifully what so many of these high performers understand, that they're humble enough to know what they know, but they're equally humble to know what they don't know. So they ask questions. So because of that, what I identified was there's 3 stages to getting going with this and developing a mindset of humility. So the first stage is what we all have to pass through, but high performers just get through it quicker than anyone else, is what I call peak idiot stage. So peak idiot stage is where you've got high levels of confidence but low levels of knowledge on a topic. So you go, oh, that'll be easy. So it's like when you go to Spurs and you sit next to the guy in the stand and he goes, I could do a better job than him. And you see him and he's sat there and he's 20 stone. He's not done any physical exercise in years. That's peak idiot stage, because you go, you're genuinely saying that you could do a better job than a young 20-something-year-old athlete that's out there on a field. Like, you don't realize how far away from that level you're operating at. So it's like when you watch the first stages of programs like X Factor, like, they're the bits that I'll always tune in. If they're on the telly, I'll always stop and watch them, because they're the bits that are the Dunning-Kruger law in action. You know, when somebody shows up and goes, oh, I want to sing like Mariah Carey now, and then they open their mouth and they sound like a cat being strangled. That's funny, because you're watching somebody operating in peak idiot stage. Once you get through that stage, and if you can do it just quickly as possible, is what I call the valley of humility. And the valley of humility is characterized by just asking lots of questions, just being really open-minded, just saying to people those 3 words, I don't know, and being comfortable saying them, you know, trying things out. If you get put on your backside and it doesn't work, you don't regard it as a failure. You just go, right, what have I learned from it? Let's try it again, but do it a bit smarter. And what we interviewed a guy called Nims Purger, that he was like, he climbed the world's highest mountains. He was a special forces soldier from Nepal. He had a great line about the valley of humility. He said, your ability to be good at something depends on how long you're prepared to be shit at it for. And it was like, you've just captured it, because that is exactly what it is, that you have to admit that you don't know something or you're bad at something to get better at it. And I think the longer you spend there, then you get to stage 3 that I refer to as the hill of knowledge. And it's a hill rather than a mountain of knowledge, because it means that you can come back down into the valley really easily to pick up more information. But it's a hill because it gives you a different perspective. It gives you an appreciation of your craft and the willingness to be able to utilize it and get better. So I don't know if that helps for people listening, Stephen, but I think to get going with any of this stuff, the first thing is get past peak ignorance stage, peak idiot stage of saying, oh, I can't do that, or I reckon it'll be easy. Get beyond that quickly as possible and just start with energy, create action, and that gets you into the valley of humility. Spend as much time there learning your craft, understanding it, like what you do with your lunchtime learning sessions. That's a great example of a valley of humility for people that come and join, people that are listening, because they're curious, they're open-minded, even though like they don't know who I am, they've still dialed in to come and listen and think, oh, there might be a different angle to this. Anyone on this call today is, I would suggest, in the valley of humility, that they can then go back up to their own hill of knowledge and go, right, how do I use this? How do I apply something from what Stephen teaches us that I can use? So that would be my suggestion of understand the 3 stages, and at any stage, know where you are on it.
Lovely. Well, there's a lady here called Carly who I introduced to your podcast, and you talk about NIMS, and that NIMS interview, I mean, she says it was very inspiring, but I actually know it changed her life.
Oh, wow.
And she took action as a result of it. And she's done incredibly well. She's really happy in her job now. And I'm really
brilliant.
She's on here as well. And she's a massive,
thank you,
she's a massive advocate of yours.
Well,
So
thank you, Carly, and well, first of all, thank you for listening, and thank you, Stephen, again for recommending it. But like, and it's incredibly kind what that feedback from Carly. So I feel humbled by it, but I'd suggest that anything like that is because you're open to it. So, like, to listen to someone like Nims, for example, that you might not have heard of him or you don't know what it is. So for Carly to even just give that a go is the first step of bravery that I'd suggest is entirely down to her. But then to be open-minded enough in that valley of humility to go, okay, let's listen to this guy, and then finally to take it and apply it at the hill of knowledge. Carly, thank you. Thanks for doing that. That's genuinely made my day.
brilliant. Well, there you go. Can only go down here from now.
I know, yeah. My day's peaked at 7:45.
That's good going. So again, one of the things is that I get asked is, you're an incredible guest. Why are you on here? And that's the point. You've had incredible guests. You've gone from Tim Peake, Joe Malone. You've got incredible footballers, business people. Susie Marr, I thought was exceptional. So many amazing podcasts. So Clive Woodward. They're unbelievable things there, but it's a question about asking. So how do people again get out of their comfort zone and just ask for these things? Obviously all these people here, they're in property at the moment. There's a property shortage. They need more properties. How would they, what would a high performer do to get their message out there?
Okay, so there's two questions there's two angles that I'll answer that question, if I may, Stephen. So the first one is, and it's probably standard in sales. I don't work in sales, so if this is obvious, please forgive me for being patronising. But I remember reading many years ago that I think it was in the Institute of Sales and Marketing, that suggested that 73% of sales in the UK are made after the consumer rejects that chance to sale 5 or more times. So what they were suggesting is nearly 3/4 of sales in the UK happen after the person that eventually buys it rejects it 5 or more times. And the bit that really stood out to me was, what percentage of salespeople go beyond 5 or more rejections? And the answer was 8%.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if those figures have changed or they're different these days, but I remember, I'm not particularly good at maths, but I remember thinking, just look at the numbers then. So what we're suggesting is, when people read and go, why does money go to money? Why does success lead to success? Well, the answer on the stats was that you've got 8% of people obviously winning 73% of the business. And it wasn't because they were better or they had a better product. There was something about grit and resilience and perseverance that meant you just kept failing, fail smarter, fail again, fail smarter, and keep doing it until eventually you hone your craft. So I think that was the stat that always stood out to me, that reminded me of sales. But then what I would spin off from that is, that's a growth mindset. Because the second angle to it is, it's about developing a growth mindset. Because it's not just about doing the same thing and failing. That's the definition of madness that's often attributed to Einstein. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. But a growth mindset says you do something, you learn from it, and you do it again, but you do it better. So where a growth mindset comes from, if people may have heard the phrase and don't know the origins of it.
Carol Dweck.
Sorry? Carol Dweck, yeah. So I'm sure you teach this on it, but the origins of the Carol Dweck stuff, again, if people just want a bit of context, was that back in the 1990s, she was an educational psychologist at Carnegie Mellon University out in New York. And what she did was she basically took 300 kids and divided them at random in half. So half of the group of kids were taught mathematics skills, and they were given the message that you're good at maths, you're talented mathematician. The other half of the kids were taught about brain skills and how the brain develops like a muscle. The more you work it, the more you test it, the stronger it becomes. And the two kids went on a 6-week course with those different messages. And then at the end of it, they were both tested on mathematics skills. They were given 8 maths puzzles of varying difficulty. So when the first set of results came out where the maths test was easy, the difference between the two groups was negligible. When the test got the medium level of difficulty, what they found is kids that thought they were talented at maths tended to spend about half as much time trying to solve a puzzle as the kids that were taught about the brain getting smarter when they struggle. So right away, you see it, perseverance is developed simply by understanding that your brain gets stronger the more you work on something. When the test went to the most difficult level, what they found is that kids that were told they were talented, when they couldn't do the puzzle, they went, oh, because I'm failing, because I'm not good enough. And they immediately started to characterize their struggle as something about their level of competence. They basically said, I'm not talented enough. And they therefore underperformed against what they were actually capable of. The kids who had been taught about the brain, the brilliant thing about this was they never saw themselves as failing. They just saw themselves as learning and developing and getting better. So they overperformed. So to answer your question about the market at the minute and how there's a housing shortage and people getting out there, well, the mindset to keep going and to hit and to be in that 8% that go beyond 5 or more rejections has to come down to a growth mindset. The perseverance is developed by the idea of going, just because they've said no doesn't mean it is really a no, or that everybody's going to have a no. So how do I get better at this? How do I refine my message? How do I become more skilled at the sales technique that maybe understands their objections and comes up with an answer to it? In short, all the things that I know that you teach and you work with and coach and develop. But I think the reason I mention it is that sometimes you're never a prophet in your own town, Stephen. So I'm advocating the work you do because I know that you do that, but I'm hopefully answering it from a different perspective that says the value in what you offer is incredible in terms of the results that it can deliver.
Thank you. And a couple more comments. So Carly replied, it made me jump out of my comfort zone and take risks. Ian Macbeth, who has set up his own business and I think is doing exceptionally well. Nim's podcast episode inspired me to sign up for a 24-hour run, 1 month away now.
Oh, wow. Good luck, Ian.
And you've got loads of people that are going to take a look and listen to the podcast. I'm going to listen to it on my next run tomorrow. Thank you. So, and Carly's already trying to sell one of her clients to say that they'll be using her product after 5 times.
Oh, so, brilliant.
So one of the things that I just picked up there was your language, where you talked about failings equal learnings. How do you get that? You know, how can you change that mindset to understand that it is a failing? So, you know, one of the things I think last time, I mean, to be honest, I didn't sleep last night. I was so excited speaking to you. And I know the last time we spoke, I was incredibly nervous. But one of the things that I learned is that actually you're a human. You've got, you know, a couple of eyes, you've got an ear, you know, whatever. And you're just, you know, we've got the same blood and we can talk to each other. But it's understanding that and making that first one. But I love the fact that you said, you know, look at failings as learnings. So again, you know, with that mindset, how can you change that mindset to say, you know, I haven't failed here. This is a lesson and I'm going to improve and get it better.
Yeah. Again, I suppose it's a really interesting question. And I think it like the reason I hesitate with the answer is because I think if you're cynical about this stuff, you can sort of take the piss out of it really easily. Do you know what I mean? And the stuff that I do as well, that I could laugh at or cringe and go, oh, don't do that. Like I remember hearing a guy once advocating. He went, you know, I don't have an alarm clock. When my alarm goes off, it's my opportunity clock. And I remember sat there going, no, that's like, don't be a dick. Like, so it sort of left me cold. And so I could understand how some of this stuff can be taken and misinterpreted and lampooned in so many ways. But I think a big key is to control our language. The reason what I'm getting to is that control our language. So when you hear that oh, a failure isn't a failure, it's just a learning. if you want to laugh at that and go, oh, well, what does that teach us? But the reality is, when you change your language and go, well, it's just a learning. It's about me pausing and getting smarter and learning what I could do better. I think what that does is it just opens up your brain to different possibilities. The language then starts to shift your frames of reference. So let me give you a really simple example about, say, like, I know you've got older boys now, Stephen, but like when kids are young, think about where they come back and they go, oh, I'm not good at maths, or I'm not good at football. And kids are brilliant at sort of labeling themselves as not good at something. I can't do this. And yet, and then think about how we are as parents, our instinct is to go and go, yes, you are, you're good at it. And then what you force them to do by that response is they end up defending their original stance. And they find lots of evidence that proves why they can't do that skill. I can't do maths, I can't do it. And they think of all the failures because they're defending what you've done. While your intent is going, no, you are good at it. You are good. I think you've got capability. No, I've just told you I can't do it. So they're already then establishing a rule. Whereas if you go and say to them, no, you're not good at maths. Yeah. You're not good at football. Yeah. Think about what that word, that three-letter word, does. The word "yeah" opens up the possibility. So you're not asking them to defend that position, but you're going, no, you're not good at it yet because you've not worked hard enough at it. You've not been to enough practices to get good at it. But there's always that optimistic view of the world that things can improve, things can get better. So that's, to me, a really neat example of how powerful language can be, so that it starts to open your brain up to a different possibility. It doesn't deny reality, but it opens up to that reality isn't fixed, it's not permanent. There is always a chance that it can change. So I think understanding how we frame it and the language we use and the messages that sends to our brain can be a really important way of shifting that, all right, a failure sounds terminal, or failure sounds like it's something that's permanent. Whereas if you go, you know what, it was a learning, and it's a learning that, so what have I learned from it? Well, a learning says, right, first of all, you've got to stop and study what happened. And then you've got to take something different away from it. That means that when I do it again, it might be another learning, but it'll be a learning that's more informed or smarter. So don't underestimate the power of language, I suppose, is what I'm saying with this stuff, in terms of don't cringe when you start to reframe it, but do it for whatever works well for you that seems congruent and consistent, but opens up different possibilities in your language rather than permanent likelihoods.
Okay, great. So Sam Hunter, who has also got a fantastic podcast called World Class Agency,
Okay.
about Nintendo theory. You can never beat a video game without dying a few times first. Defeat leads to victory when you learn from it.
But yeah, I love that. So like, I've got an 11-year-old boy, so he plays a lot of sort of these games, and I think this is one of the things that those games give. Like when I see him playing it, like he plays Fortnite, it's called, where you die, you can get killed on it. But again, if you're smart enough about it, you can go back and play right away again, where you just take the mistakes from it. So you're not waiting for ages, you're not stewing on it, you just fall off the horse, you get back on it, and you try and do it a bit faster. So I love that Nintendo theory. I certainly wasn't familiar with it, but again, yeah, I think it's really good. These computer games, you see the metaphor and the lesson wherever you look.
Okay, so recruitment. How do I go and find these high performers? Where are they? And once I find them, what are the sort of questions I should be asking them on the interview to see whether they are a high performer?
Right. I'll give you some tips that I picked up along the podcast with this. The first thing is that I think when you recruit for somebody, there's a great phrase that I heard years ago, and I repeated it on the last. I'm repeating what I said on the last lunchtime session, Stephen. That I interviewed many years ago a guy called Cheeky Begiristain, who was the director of football at Barcelona. He does it now at City. And we were speaking about recruitment in the football sense. And he had a great line. He said, your talent will get you as far as the dressing room door. Your behaviour will determine whether we keep you there or not. So his point was, you have to have a level of competence. You have to be good that will let you in the dressing room of Barcelona. But after that, talent levels out. So whether you're a bit of a dick or not, is going to decide whether we'll have you there. And I think when we talk about recruiting, I think what I'm about to say doesn't negate competence. You've got to be good at your job. But I also think that once you're operating at a certain level, the difference in terms of the technical skills is negligible. Do you know what I mean? Like in sporting terms, sort of like an elite level, everyone is roughly as fast, as fit, as strong as each other. So then it comes down to mindset and sort of conduct and behaviours. So you need to have a level of competence. I get that in terms of sales and recruiting people. But then the first thing I would advocate is, what are your non-negotiable behaviours? So when people are joining your business, what are the non-negotiable behaviours you're recruiting for? So when you're good, why are you good? How do you define it in behavioural terms? So then that then starts to say, so recruit against those behaviours. Recruit the behaviours that you're not prepared to compromise on. So I'll give you an example of a mate of mine. This is a few years ago now. A mate of mine was working as a physio at a sports club, a professional sports club. And he phoned me up, and at the time there was like a glut of sports physios coming out of university. So this job was an assistant physio job, not particularly well remunerated, but it was a foot in the door to get into professional sport. So my mate advertised it, and he was bombarded with high caliber applicants. So he phoned me up one day, and he said, he said, I've got a problem. I said, what is it? He said, I've got too many good people applying for this job, and I don't know where to start, how to recruit. So I said, okay, fine. I said, let's start at the start. I said, this is a good problem to have. So let's go to your non-negotiables. What are the 3 behaviours that you're recruiting for that you want somebody to demonstrate consistently? So he came up with 3. So his first one was, I need them to be, because budgets at this club weren't high. So he said, I need them to be adaptable. I need them to be resourceful and adaptable. The second one was, he said, I need them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and not be bullied, because the role was a junior role. And he said, there's a likelihood that some players take advantage of you. And then the third one was something like, you need to be personable and good company, something like that, or have a laugh. So I said, right, okay, let's take the first 2. I said, do me a favour. I said, narrow your candidates down to your top 5, just the 5 most qualified or the ones that you think can do the job best. So he did that. And then we came up with an idea of how he recruited. And the idea we came up with was, he put the wrong address. When they got to final interview stage, he put the wrong address on the final interview invite letter. Now, when he put the wrong address on it, it wasn't anything outlandish. It was just he sent them to the training ground rather than the stadium or something like that. So it looked like a legitimate mistake. But then what we agreed was, just sit back and wait and see what happens. And what happened was, 2 of the candidates distinguished themselves at that moment, because he was looking for who can stand on their own, so who's adaptable in the face of change, and who can stand on their own 2 feet. So one of the guys distinguished themselves because he phoned up the night before to double check, belt and braces, can I just double check where I'm coming? And when he got the call, he went, you come into the stadium, and he went, oh, the letter says training ground. So right away, this is a guy that's resourceful enough to be planned. The other guy that distinguished himself turned up an hour early for his interview, was directed to the wrong place, found out, got Google Maps out, and made his way to the interview on time without any fuss. The other 3 candidates all turned up late, but panicked, brandishing the letter to prove that it's not my fault, you gave me the wrong information. So right away then, he had these 2 candidates based on the fact that he was clear what the behaviours he was looking for were, and then he was looking for evidence to reinforce it. Now, I've I'm telling that story, and as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, I'm not sure how that would stack up in an employment tribunal if you got in trouble for it. So maybe, adapt it slightly. But the point is, like, take the premise from it rather than the actual example of, be clear about the behaviours you're recruiting for, and then look for evidence of them. Ask for people to demonstrate it. So there's a great example that I read years ago that Walt Disney, when he recruited Imagineers, these were the people that were, who the name implies, had to come up with like great innovations for Walt Disney Studios. One of the tests that he would apply was he'd take them for a meal before the interview, and he'd always order them a bowl of soup, and he'd watch really carefully to see if they put salt and pepper in the soup before they tasted it. Because, and if they did, they weren't getting the job, because what that indicated to Disney was that they were people that weren't open-minded. They didn't come and try something before they decided whether it needed extra flavouring. They just worked on assumptions that it'll already need it. And he was saying that assumption is the killer of innovation in his world. So he was clear about little tricks like that are useful. I remember Ranulph Fiennes, the explorer, listening to him years ago, where like one of his trademark non-negotiable behaviours was the idea that you had to be adaptable, because on his adventures he goes, shit happens, things go wrong. So when he recruits, he holds interviews in Hyde Park, in the hotels on Park Lane. And when people turn up suited and booted, thinking they're meeting Sir Ranulph Fiennes and they're going to have an interview in a hotel suite, he has a dirty kit waiting for them, and he takes them for a run in Hyde Park, and he shows them the map that they're going to run on, and everyone thinks it's like a 5K run. And he said, and when they get to the end of the 5K, he said, they've sort of emptied the tank to show how fit they are. He goes, at the end of the run, he goes, come on, we'll do it again. And he has people watching to see how they respond when something unexpected happens to them. Come on, we're not only going for another run, we're going to run even further. And he said it's basically to see how they respond and how adaptable they are. So there's hopefully a few examples there that say, how do you do it in maybe a less or a different environment? And the answer is, be clear about your behaviours first of all, and then think about ways that people can demonstrate those behaviours to you. Because the behaviours of high performance will be different maybe in your world than it might be in Ranulph Fiennes' world. So you be clear about your own behaviours, and then be clear about how you can recruit people against those behaviours.
Great, thank you. So following on for that, I've got another question.
Go on.
If you wanted to instigate cultural change, and the long-term plan was to recruit cultural architects to do so, what would the short-term plan be?
Well, again, so I like the question, but I would say you have to go back, first of all, for cultural changes, how do you want people to behave consistently within your world? So you have to be able to articulate what the behaviours are. If you want to get people behaving in a different way, tell me what the behaviours are. So a nice way of doing that is to conduct a really simple exercise called success leaves clues. If you're thinking, how do I recruit against behaviours? Success leaves clues is a really nice way of doing it, because what you do is you set the parameters of what success is defined as in your world. So you might go, success for me is the best client relationship I've got, or tell me the best quarter results you've ever had. Tell me the best year's performance, trading performance you've had. Doesn't matter, you define it. But whatever the parameters are of that success, what you then do is you invite everybody within your world to do an analysis of it. You say, come on, let's be like Sherlock Holmes. Let's do a forensic analysis of that success. So what did people say about us? What was happening when we did this? And you explore why you were successful. And what you'll find on the back of that is there will be some behaviours that were consistently in evidence, behaviours that were consistently happening whenever success occurred. That then leads you in the direction of what your non-negotiable behaviours are. So you go and explore them. Now, two bear traps that lie in wait for a lot of people at this stage are worth highlighting. The first one is talk behaviours, not values. And the reason I say that is a value is abstract. A value is critical, but your value should be reflected in your behaviours. So like the timekeeping example, if you've got a value of respecting other people, you tend to turn up on time for interviews. But if you regularly show up late for meetings or for appointed times, there is a value somewhere that says, I think my time is more important than yours. Being on time doesn't really matter to me because it's my time, not yours. So your values should always be manifested and reflected in your behaviours. So talk behaviours, not values, because values are easy to talk. Behaviours, you've got evidence of them, they're tangible. And then the second thing is don't have any more than 3. So prioritize, force your brain to prioritize and go, right, out of all these behaviours, what are the ones that I'm just not prepared to compromise on out of all of them? Because anything more than 3 suddenly starts to become difficult to remember. They become unwieldy, or you start fudging it or being political with it. So success leaves clues as your starting point. From that, you start to identify behaviours, not values, and you have no more than 3. What then that happens is that speaks to something around the cultural architect stuff. Cultural architects are basically the leaders without title. These are people that just identify with these behaviours and go, no, that's who I am. When I'm at my best, that's how I show up. So invite, and then the way you identify them is start catching people in, not catching them out. Start looking for people that demonstrate these behaviours and recognise it. And then once you give them a status of recognising it and that you start to validate and reinforce it, they then have the confidence to start behaving that way. And what happens is a rising tide raises all the boats, that other people then start seeing the standards. Well, if you can do it, I can do it. And then your cultural architects then have the confidence to call people in and call people out. So when people are not doing it, they go, hey, this is the way we do it here. But then when they are doing it, they go, oh, I like that, that's good. So you just create that virtuous circle. But it all starts from that exercise of success leaves clues. If people are listening to this today and going, how do I instigate this within my world? That's probably the easiest starting position. And the brilliant thing about it is, because you talk about success, everybody's got an opinion and everyone will join in with it. You're not hammering people for what went wrong. You're saying, come and let's have a chat about what went right. Everybody, it's like that old saying, Stephen, that, failure has got many, success has got many fathers, and failure is often born an orphan. People, I have nothing to do with me when it goes wrong. But when you're saying what went right, I think I've got a view on that. Everybody's got an opinion on it. So it's a nice place to start.
Okay, so another question's come in. Somebody's got exceptionally high standards and they can't get their team to have those same high standards as they have.
Yeah.
Is there a way that they should just accept it for what it is? Or is there a way that they can get people up to their standards, or are their expectations just far too high?
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, well, first of all, it leads. I'm going to work on the assumption that this person is self-aware enough to know that they genuinely do have high standards, as opposed to just different standards. Because what I mean by that is, again, the language is interesting. That how do you know that your standards are higher than somebody else's rather than just different? Do you know what I mean? That what's acceptable to you, like you're implying that they're better than somebody else's. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe it's different. So if you've got the self-awareness that no, these are agreed, and I think that I have these characteristics that are demonstrably better. Let's work on that assumption. What I would say is that once you've got them, first of all, don't underestimate the power of example. So we're hardwired not to follow hypocrites, aren't we? One of the things that, like, think about political leaders, think about the worst bosses you've ever had. Think about, like, I see it in sport a lot, when people say, oh, a coach has lost the dressing room. When they talk about losing a dressing room, or when you think about political leaders losing office, or people that you've worked with that you suddenly stop respecting, often it's because what they said was different than what they did. Do you remember the famous example years ago at West Ham when Alan Pardew gave an interview about the baby Bentley culture at the club? And he went, there's too many young people here getting richly rewarded too early. And he characterised it as a baby Bentley culture, which was fine. He's entitled to his view. But 3 months later, when he showed up in his brand new car, which was, you've guessed it, a baby Bentley, players then go, well, hang on a minute, you were criticising us for the very car you're driving around in. That's when you hear the stories of people losing dressing rooms, because the essence is we're hardwired not to follow hypocrites. Why would you want to follow somebody that says one thing and does something different? So don't underestimate the power of example. If you're demonstrating these behaviours in pretty much every context, and so say that you somebody that says, oh, I have high standards about respect for other people. Well, that implies every situation you're in, you show everyone courtesy and respect, not just people that you regard at the same level or more senior than you. Because people see that you treat other people like shit because you don't regard them at your level. So suddenly, I don't believe you, I think you're a hypocrite. So this is really important, first of all. And then once you've established that this happens consistently and people see that you're genuine about this in every situation, the answer is start catching people in. Start rewarding people for when they demonstrate these behaviours. And the more you catch them when they show these certain characteristics that you want to raise the standard of, catch them doing it. And the more you catch them doing it, the more you validate them. The more they validate them, the better they feel. The better they feel, the more they want that feeling. So they'll keep repeating it. And then if you work on a ratio of catch them in 5 times more than you catch them out, there's research on this by a guy called John Gottman. There's other research by a Brazilian psychologist called Marcial Losado that talk about the ratio of high-performing teams, of catching people in against catching them out, in essence, is 5 to 1. So you have to then really go out of your way to catch people in and keep reinforcing it a lot more than you catch them out. Bollocking people, bemoaning them, sort of raising, like throwing your arms up when they don't do it. You can only do that once or twice. You've got to catch them in 5 times more. So don't get exasperated with the standards. Look for evidence of it and just keep reinforcing it is probably the simplest advice I'd give to that one.
Brilliant, thank you. You've started a most amazing community. So I now know you've got the high performance circle.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. So if people aren't in it, I suggest you go to it because it's free, costs you absolutely nothing. And there's more amazing content in there as well. You've got your YouTube channel, which I think, if I listen right, you've got well over 1 million viewers or subscribers, which is pretty amazing. People on here, if they want to start their own community, what would you suggest? How do they get going? How do they start that community?
Yeah. So there's 2 questions then that are probably helpful for people that want to kick off their own community. These 2 questions, again, let me give you the origins of it if it's of interest to people. They come from the military. The world of the military uses a really simple technique to bring a sense of belonging to like a unit, especially when they're going to go into conflict. The 2 questions are called the commander's intent. And a commander's intent says, before we go into battle, we need to answer 2 things. What's our objective? What is the single most important objective we need to achieve? And the second question is, and what are the most important behaviours that we will demonstrate in how we will achieve it? So all you're answering, all those questions ask in essence is, what do we want to do and how do we intend to do it? That's all they're asking. But you need to be able to articulate them to then entice people to join your community. What's your objective? What's the objective of that community? So is it about raising the standards in sales? Is it about creating a community hub where the most vulnerable can come and feel respected? It almost doesn't matter, but you need to have a sense of purpose, a clear sense of purpose that entices, because you don't want anyone to turn up. You want people that identify with it. So this is a way of asking people to either opt in or opt out. So first of all, what do we want to do? And then what are the rules of membership? Tell me what's expected of me in my behaviour. Tell me the standards that you're going to hold me to account. And what that does is that then leads to 2 consequences that are essential for a community to thrive. Transparency, tell me the rules of the game, and consistency, apply the rules of the game.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Who mentors you?
A few different people. I've got like there's a book in it called The Tribe of Mentors, and there's a few people that I call on regularly. My wife is probably, well, my wife is definitely the first person that I call on for this, and I'll tell you a little story about where my wife was especially helpful. This is nearly 18 years ago now. I wrote my first book, right? And I had this idea for a book that I wanted to do, and it was never to self-publish it. I wanted to write a book for a particular group of people that I was doing some work with. So the context was I was working in some factories outside of Liverpool, and I'd been responsible for sort of helping this factory turn around performance, and I'd spent nearly 3 years doing it. And before I moved on, I wanted to capture a book that captured many of the lessons. So, I wanted to give the guys a book, almost like a playbook of what we'd done. And I couldn't find a book out there that these guys would read. So their education levels weren't, most of them had left school as early as possible. So if you gave them an academic textbook, they'd just dismiss it. If you gave them a book that was too woolly, they were too cynical to read it. So I wanted a book that danced somewhere between the two. And I couldn't find one. So I set out to write it myself. So I sort of wrote this book, and I spent 6 months researching it. I went and interviewed like Richard Branson, Alex Ferguson, Muhammad Ali. I did that. These guys, I showed them the manuscripts, and they went, "Yeah, Richard Branson's mum and dad was rich. That's why he's successful." So like that was their level of cynicism. So what I did was I ended up writing stories about the lads that worked in the factory as well. So there was a lad in there, for example, that he'd left school at 14, no education level, but his ambition was to give his daughters the best school, education that he'd never had. To get them in the catchment area, he wasn't in the catchment area for the best school. He was working in a factory, so he knew his pay was going to remain fairly stable. So what he did was he bought a plot of land, scrub land, in a catchment area for the best school. And he spent 4 years building his own house on this plot of land so he could move his daughters into it and get them into the best school. That's an incredible story, right? And that to me stands testament. That's just as good as Richard Branson building his Virgin business, because he did the best he could with what he had in the moment he was in. So there was loads of stories like this. So I told their story within this book, Liquid Thinking, right? And then I self-published it and I gave it to the lads in the factory. Now, what happened subsequently was the book got bought by a publisher. So the book that's on sale now is the same book that I wrote then, but it was never intended for a wider audience. But I'm digressing. I'm just giving some context on that. When I was writing the book, I'd never written a book. I didn't know how to write a book. I was making it up as I was going along. And I was with my wife, and we were going on a flight. We were flying to Dubrovnik. Right? I can remember it was a 4-hour flight. And I printed what I'd written out. And I said to my wife, "Would you read it?" And she went, "Yeah." She said, "Well, do me a favor." She said, "Don't be mithering me. Like when I'm reading the book, don't be coming and saying, 'How is it? Is it all right?' Just let me read it and I'll give you feedback at the end." So I gave it to her. We sat on this 4-hour flight and I'm reading my book and she's doing it and she's scribbling and she's got this red pen and I could see her looking. And I'm thinking, "Oh, I wonder what she's read." So we land. I said to her, "How is it?" She'd finished it. She went, "I've read it." So we're in the taxi going to where we were staying. And I said, "Come on then, give me the feedback. What do you think of it?" And she went, "I don't know how I want to say this." And I was like, "Oh, go on, just tell me." And she said to me, she said, "I know what your intention is and I know what you're capable of doing." So she said, "I know what you're trying to do and I know what you're capable of doing." She said, "And that's not it." And I was like, "What do you mean that's not it?" And she was like, "Well, this isn't good. That like you could have done this better. You didn't explain it." And she gave me feedback. And at first, I saw my ass. I was like, "How can you not get that? That's ridiculous. That's obvious what I meant." And she gave me a bit of advice. She said, "Just don't respond for 24 hours. Just you've asked me to read it. I've read it, and I've tried to give you the most honest feedback I can because I want you to do as well as you're capable of." She said, "Just reflect on it for 24 hours, and we'll come back." And when I did that, 24 hours later, I looked at it and I'd say 80% of her criticisms were valid, that I could take on board and do something different. And it was a real powerful lesson for me that sometimes you need people within your like mentors or your tribe of mentors that don't just blow smoke up your ass. Because say like writing a book, what I realized was when I shared it with other people, they understand that, oh, he wants to write a book, bless him. And they don't want to hurt your feelings. So if they read it, they go, oh, it's really good. And you go, that's actually not that helpful. I don't need your validation of telling me it's really good. I need you to tell me what in particular is good, but equally what could be better. And you need somebody, you need a relationship with a mentor that's prepared to give you that feedback but do it from a good place. And that's almost a criteria now that when, as I've gone through my career, you look for mentors, people that are prepared to not just tell you you're great. Sometimes you need a pat on the back, you need someone to pick you up and help you. But equally, sometimes you need someone to say, you could do better with that, or this is my suggestion. So my wife is certainly one of them. My dad was definitely one of them. My dad was a boxing coach. Unfortunately, over the last few years, he's quite seriously ill these days with dementia. So that's not the case, but I often hark back to his advice that I was lucky enough to have received for a long time. My mum definitely does it as well. And then I'd say I've got a best mate who's been my best mate for a long time. He just calls me out on stuff. So like he listens to the podcast, and I never thought he would. And he listens to the podcast, and he'll phone me up and he'll go, "Didn't like that question you asked there." I go, "What?" And he goes, "Oh, he'll give me something that only a mate would tell you." He'd go, "Felt you were like I felt you were too glib with that, or I could tell you I didn't research that properly," and he'll sort of challenge me. But again, we all need people in our life that's prepared to do that. But equally, he'll say to me, "I really like what you did there." So again, it goes back to that catching people in and catching people out. But I think we need like I've come off social media a lot because one, I don't like it. I've never really felt comfortable on it. But secondly, I think I don't look for validation from people. Like this has been a big lesson from so many high performers. Why do you want validation from strangers? Because they don't understand where you started to make their feedback useful. Does that make sense? And that's not being arrogant, but I think like Casper Schmeichel, when we interviewed him, really articulated this brilliantly. He said, I've got a committee of 6 people that have all learned the right to sit on their committee. And one of the rights of being on my committee is you can say what you want and I'll take it seriously because you understand my struggle. You understand my intention. You know, and you care about me. And he said, but if you're not on that committee, your criticism or your opinion isn't as highly regarded as those people in my inner circle. So when we talk about mentors, I think we all need people that sit on our inner committee that are mentors that are prepared to give us feedback, good and bad.
Look, that's a really nice place to end. You've been an amazing guest. I know that to give time at 7:30 in the morning, I know you're taking your daughter now to school. So thank you.
I know, yeah, but well, listen, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate your kind words and the invitation, but I think what you're doing is incredible, both with the lunchtime learning sessions, the sort of consultancy work you do. But I think what sort of distinguished you beyond that is the tragedy of losing Sam, but the way you've channeled that grief and that energy into making a difference to the poor, the vulnerable, and the people that are often unheard, means that me coming on at 7:30 in the morning is like a small token of my appreciation and appreciation of all those people that have followed your tribe. So from my point of view, let me thank you on behalf of my brother Chris that we spoke about at the start, but just for those people that don't get a voice, thank you for giving them a voice and for recognising them.
Thank you. That's very kind. I don't know what to say now.
No, we don't need to say anything. It's like like your example trumps anything you could say. I think it's incredible what you've done. So honestly, like the world is a better place for you and for you being in it, and certainly for Sam having been in the world. That, you know, you've made the world a better place, and I can't think of a greater legacy that Sam could have left.
Brilliant. Look, you have a great day. Thanks very much. Thank you
No,
all
thank
for
you.
watching and listening. We're incredibly grateful. Please share it. Get Damian's message out there. If you're not listening or watching the High Performance podcast, I don't know where you've been, but you need to be listening it. It's absolutely incredible. I know that you've got a book coming out with Jake at the end of the year. I know that you don't want me to publicize it, but again, that's something that's worth looking out for. So Damian, lovely having you. Thank you all, and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Stephen.
You're welcome.